it's very important for me to be here because I did have a baby a year and a half ago as a sitting MP. And while I'm not going to go into details about what happened to my insides, I do still want to talk. I still do want to talk a little bit about the impacts that the pregnancy and the birth had on me. I won't go into the exact details, but what I will say is that I did have a 40-hour-long labour, which resulted in an emergency C-section. And after the emergency C-section, I caught an infection, and so did the baby. And the Royal Free Hospital in my constituency, which is amazing, looked after us for 9 days. But even in those 9 days, while I was on the hospital bed, I had to do emails and I had to sign things off from my office simply because there was no one else to do it, and I couldn't really nominate someone to take care of crucial matters. And there were certain crucial matters that did come to me, which I'll elaborate in a minute. And I'm not describing these details because I want sympathy. The reason I'm describing them is because before I had a child, I had never quite realised the physical impact pregnancy has on your body. And bearing in mind, I was quite old when my younger sister was born, so I have been around children, I have been around babies. I still didn't realise quite what would happen to your body when you went through a 40-hour ordeal in the way that I did, and after the emergency C-section, where I physically couldn't move from the bed, and I physically had to ask everyone for help, which is not easy, as I'm used to doing things for myself and not asking people for help. So it definitely wasn't easy, but because I was in a seat that had been a very marginal seat, the lady I had taken over from had only won the seat by 42 votes. I had only won it by just over 1,000 votes. I didn't feel I could neglect my constituents, so I came back to work very quickly afterwards. And as a result, because my body hadn't recovered, I developed a very serious case of mastitis, which if anyone's had that will know what it does to your body. And the reason I had that when I went to the GP, they were very clear that I was overworked, I was tired, I was exhausted, and I had come back to work very early. And during that time, in my sleep-deprived state, I knew I had to do something, which is why I tabled an early day motion asking if we could change the way the voting system worked. Because even I was getting emails saying, why haven't you turned up for this vote? In the 6 weeks that I had taken off after my emergency C-section, I was being asked why I hadn't voted in a certain way, why I hadn't turned up for a certain meeting. And if you know the constituents of Hampstead and Kilburn, you will know that they look up your voting record and they want to see whether you have turned up for votes or not, which is why when I tabled the early day motion, I wanted to make it clear that we've got to change the voting system, and this is the time to do it when there are more women than ever before, and this point has been made, having children in Parliament. And I wanted to point out how our position here in Parliament lags behind other countries in the world. So in Sweden, Denmark and Slovenia, members of Parliament may be granted a leave of 12 months in case of pregnancy, childbirth or adoption, and this is the same in Estonia, Finland and Latvia. In Belgium, Portugal and Croatia, the Netherlands, there's no formal maternity leave, but a member of the House of Representatives who is on maternity leave can be replaced by another MP from the same political group so that they're not penalised for their absence. The fact that we're behind these countries with our attitude to parental leave is compounded by our attitude to our parliamentary voting system. So Scotland, India, Ireland, Israel and the European Union, just to name a few, all have electronic voting means, which means it's not just only time efficient but also accommodating. Yes.
I just want to say to my friend who's making an incredibly powerful speech, would she agree with me that by the time we're done with this, we should match, if not better, the best parliaments in the world? And also, just to say, physically, I think having the second is harder.
I'd like to thank my honourable friend for the note of confidence there, but I absolutely agree with what she's saying, and we do have to better it. And if we want to make Parliament a welcoming place for female representatives, and if we want to act in the way that my constituency, Labour Party, did when I stood for election, where they categorically, one after another, said, we want more women in Parliament, we want an all-women shortlist, we've had a female MP for 23 years in the form of Glenda Jackson, now we want another female MP. That's what we should all be encouraging in the House of Commons, where we sit. Yes, of course.
thank the Honourable Lady for giving way in for an excellent speech, and she mentioned Scotland, so I couldn't miss the opportunity to jump in there. And we've been in debates on this matter before, and she mentions electronic voting, and of course in the Scottish Parliament they have a seat for every member, and she will know as I do that some of the arguments against proxy and electronic voting is that you need to be in here to hear the debate, and I know she's made this point previously as well, that the irony being that this chamber does not fit even half of the members of this House. We all have modern technology, we can all watch at home, so there's no reason not to do this, is there?
Absolutely, and my honourable member and I have had discussions about this, how we do feel that Parliament does need to become more modern, and we do need to encourage things like e-voting, as we've discussed many times. Maybe that will be next on the agenda. I wanted to quickly touch on the fact that I had a lot of support, as I've mentioned, from my constituency Labour Party when I ran to be an MP, because I was a young woman. They thought there was a chance I would have children, and there were questions raised about it, but the chairman, David Queen, who sadly died a few weeks ago, was a real feminist and said, what is the problem if we have MPs who have children? It's good for the constituency. And he also pointed out that apparently politicians with children get more votes. I don't know if that's true, but that's something he said. I also wanted to use the opportunity to just talk a bit about the support I received in Parliament as well. The staff at the nursery were really, really fantastic when I first took my child here in Parliament, the Parliament nursery, so I want to pay tribute to them. The member for Holborn and St Pancras, who was sitting here earlier on, is my neighbouring MP, and right at the beginning, when I had morning sickness, he was the first to ring and say, if there are any meetings that you would like me to cover for you, I'm happy to go, because his wife had gone through the same thing. The member for Ilford North, on a trip to Paris, carried up my suitcase up and down the stairs of Gare du Nord and also St Pancras International when I physically couldn't lift the suitcase. And on the same trip to Paris to explore how we tackle anti-Semitism, the former MP for, Brentwood, Eric Pickles, said to me he's happy to be the godfather to my child and whether I wanted to name my daughter Erica after him, which I declined. But the MP for Chatham and Aylesford gave me a wristband to monitor the number of times my baby kicked, and there was a sense of real spirit amongst different members from the other side, who I would often talk to, including the MP for Norwich North, about what we did as young women who had children but also wanted to be good MPs for our constituency. And the Speaker and the Deputy Speaker, when my ever-growing bump, if you're 4'11", your bump does really stand out. Both said to me that I didn't have to bob up and down and that I could just wave my order paper and that I would be selected to speak, which was a real privilege at the time. I wish I could still do that, but I can't. But it is a real privilege. But perhaps the memory that most stands out, which I wanted to mention in this House, is when, right after I've had the baby, I got an urgent call from my office because Richard Ratcliffe, my constituent, had called. His wife had been in Iran and she had been detained by the Iranian authorities with their small child. I had just had my baby, but obviously when my office called, I had to meet with him because there was no one I could delegate that responsibility to. When I spoke to Richard Ratcliffe on the phone, he said, why don't I pop over to your house? And I said, that's a good idea, let's have a meeting. And he said, is there any chance the leader of the Labour Party could also meet me? So I decided to ring the member for Islington North and I said, I've just had a baby, but there's a really urgent case. Is there anything we can do about this? We'll have to meet near my flat because I'm breastfeeding. And the member for Islington North said, why don't I come over to your flat and we'll have a meeting there? So I had a meeting where I had a tiny baby in my arms. I had Richard Ratcliffe, whose wife had been detained in Iran. I had the member for Islington North, the leader of the Labour Party, in the room. And while I breastfed the baby, we discussed the Iranian authorities, the Revolutionary Guards, and talked about how to get my constituent back into the country. At one point, my baby was very unsettled, but I had to take some notes about an important matter that Richard was talked about. So I said to the member for Islington North, could you hold the baby for a bit while I write notes? Now, the baby had been quite unsettled, but for some reason, as soon as I handed her to the member for Islington North, she settled down and went to sleep. Now, there could be a point... I mean, I don't want to say it. I don't want to say it, but there may be a point about kinder, gentler cuddling which she preferred. I don't know what it was, but I wanted to tell people in the chamber about the fact that that was a real defining moment for me of my motherhood. Both men in that room demonstrated serious comradely spirit to me, taking time to come to my house because I didn't feel I could leave, not batting an eyelid while I breastfed, but that's the kind of ethos I think we need to bring into this House to show people that if you're a female MP, you have an urgent case, a woman who's been detained in Iran, but you still want to fulfil your duties as a parliamentary MP, there are ways to make provisions, because if we can do it in my flat in North London, we can do it here as well. I sit on the Women and Equality Select Committee. We scrutinise legislation around other people's paternity and maternity. If we can't lead by example, then we shouldn't be sitting here. So I commend this motion to the House.
Johnny.